And I think Eric wants to sit over there. I think
Yeah, I started being on as a Ryan. Oh, yeah. Hello, it's training day. I can't casual.
So you this is like.
No, Peachtree Middle. No, I know, it's like, yeah, it's the one with the patrons.
Oh, so the logo, okay,
Yeah,
that's good. I think
It's
that's
embarrassing.
very, very good. Well, I wasn't very.
And no, I don't do a vampire, I'm Orange. No,
So
but I support Penny.
those are very good.
Yeah. I don't know, I lost that. I was thinking of like finding common table, but this will be good. Oh, wait, training material. So I saw one person not gonna make it.
Yeah, Seki, I did not know it's cold and something.
This morning, I will show you, how do you feel? It has to be, yeah,
You're sure.
It's Peachtree Middle and the hall is already on the spec. So I'm actually not participating. I'm from Boston.
okay, yeah, I also feel really bad when, like, I'm like, did you guys not know that you like totally stole?
That's really funny.
But we're a pathetic kind of a middle school, I don't think anyone's coming up.
We always hope that there's one of them. Like a little that has literally kind of like the thing and thing like on the high school.
Yeah, I don't know, people, not.
I tried to do that.
No, but now I was totally doing well. We used to be still the Patriots, but we went to be like who's this and now it's. I love the kids. We should look at this. So what's the other next day?
That's where I got percentage of that.
But I actually like this. Because actually it's.
So many work.
No, it might, I think that's actually.
Okay. You just have the mouse.
And that's about it. It's just like, either- we have to work.
Yeah.
And I said, feel like something has said this, I'm very only. Like.
This is why everything's. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think there's any star,
I just want to make sure he's able to see
nobody really star
the
that.
stuff.
Yeah, it's tricky though.
It is, so I'm not sure what we're gonna do now, but I don't think we can.
No, so.
This one I could, well, I'm gonna, not sure mine is the work.
Yeah.
Hey Ryan, can we pull up PowerPoint on this laptop?
No. It's like that most people. There's so few people that actually.
Yeah.
Another one, like, exactly, and then same thing, instead of having somebody else, stay mode.
That's a long, like no one. And now it's becoming more people, people who get a lot. Becoming more and more. This is a case, kudos for ways to instead of going, but no, like that.
Okay, so we have our first international travel that's coming up. I've been to South America, but I've never been to Europe, so I'm going to France.
Nice.
So any advice for surviving the long flight?
No, it's good thing it works.
Okay.
That should be fine. It's not actually, either solve, is it, it's so that on the computer, but we can get out of the standard. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty hard. So that's what we call it. That's what that's the one thing like because you're probably and then you really want to policy get up and Europe and you need to follow through and at least for that evening.
That's what. But it's neat to, I'm just like, so we're all going, starting on here. And getting back to the matter, it's not the same. I wanted to, I lost. Too board for me to get that information, right?
Do full size. There we go. And then you might see it. Yeah. All of it else in the phone is type either. You can't even do it. Oh, and it's like it's hard. But it's really cool.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. Well, just left you messages. It's crazy.
But you did it, man. It would have been this far, yeah. Yeah, we're right. You know, he's one better than the one.
It's very short. Even how. Yeah,
Let's make out and this is honestly, I understand. You know, it's, yeah. The same people, but they're changed on a. Yeah, they adjusted, you know, been southern. Yes. Said it, possibilities. Yeah, those, we talked to the lanes, kind of, like I said, as they said, and they corrected the law publish, no, that was. It was a mistake, but it's okay. And a lot of things, so we can see it next month.
You look at food with me. Just so you don't forget that first one. I'm taking this with extra risk. Okay. Thanks for taking me out of it. Should I have planning commission meeting? I mean, today the agenda is really simple. We're just going for training, but typically we'll have some sort of zoning piece. This is where this is the first round of you like always preparing for especially.
Yeah. Well, so.
And then I can submit. So we'll be here. Okay. Yeah, Cheyenne. Drop down 50 push-ups.
And we have.
Yeah, I was thinking.
With my
Okay, so.
green hair straight.
Okay. Okay, did you pull the presentation? Screen here.
Yeah.
Is it already on?
Yeah, it's already pulled up.
So three of the people.
Okay, okay.
Should be around. That's funny, that's.
No, that's yesterday. And good, yesterday.
I'll be there.
Yeah. You would give us a speak about that.
I'm waiting for my. Anyway.
What was it? Did you want to? Did they get water? Yeah, it's like, it'll come back. Yeah, like, yeah. It's always. Yeah. And then maybe. Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, traffic is. Over here.
Yeah. So anyway, there's this, my wife will be very pleased to know she's ready to play Michelle. It was a couple years ago. That was a really hard time for America. That was hard though.
It's really. Right here is problem here.
I would know a thing. Sorry to this man.
All right, good evening, everybody. Want to go ahead and call the March 14th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission to order, please. We'll go ahead and start with roll call. I'll ask to start to my right, please.
Elizabeth Shin,
Thomas O'Brien.
Erica Harris,
Scott Brown.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I hope and anticipate that we'll be joined by more of us because tonight is shaping up to be a training session, which will hopefully be really worthwhile. Our first order of business is the approval of the February 14th, 2023 Planning Commission minutes. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to review them. They're a little bit more substantial than usual. If we could, I would request, assuming there's no items that need addressing beyond the one I'm about to raise, I'd request a motion subject to consistently spelling my name O''BRIEN throughout the document, if you please. So if we may have a motion.
motion to approve the minutes subject of Commissioner O'Brien's name being spelled correctly with an EN.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, Commissioner Brown seconds that. Hearing a motion and a second, is there any discussion? All right, at this time, all in favor, hearing no discussion, all in favor of approving the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, like sign. All right, the motion carries. The minutes are approved, subject to that change. Next item, and what looks like the primary item on our agenda for this evening is an organizational and procedural item, and that's training for the Planning Commission, hopefully making us as valuable as we can possibly be. So we'd go ahead and invite staff to take it away.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce Mr. Eric Linton, our city manager. He was formerly a community development director. So he's the hands-on expert. So Eric, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Eric Linton, thank you. And I want to thank you all for your service here because it's takes a okay, you got it? Is it okay? Good.
This one here? Yeah. Oh, no, I mean like, do I transfer this, where it shows the presentation mode? No, but it shows the actual. Okay, no, that's it.
Okay, good, okay. All right. Once again, I do want to thank y'all for serving on the planning commission. Like Richard said, I've done this for quite a while, since 1996, actually. From the planning standpoint, and just to give you some history, because it's all part of what makes us part of a community. And the planning commission, is the first line of defense, so to speak, whenever it comes for rezoning in the community. Y'all are the first sounding board for the citizens. You're the first buffer for the city council to make decisions. So, and y'all are a recommending body. You get your information from the staff, you look at the report, and then you start making your decisions. Under the rules and procedures, one thing that we've changed over the time, I think y'all can table it one time, is that right? Now, and that was something that we really wanted to put into the zoning procedures. And the reason for that is to kind of move applications along. The council, though, can refer things back to the planning commission. So, which we haven't really done that, I don't think, Richard. Have we ever referred anything back? I don't think we have. Right. So there is that ability. And the reason I'm telling y'all that is because sometimes if something's not unanimous or you want to work on it some more, don't feel defeated from the standpoint of, hey, this is our last bite at this particular item. You can always send something forward, with some kind of minor recommendation. Richard, is it required for them to make a solid recommendation, or can they send it forward with no recommendation? Right. So you can send something forward with no recommendation and use that tool if you ever need it. It's not something I really advise you to do very often, but if there's a reason you want to not have an application go forward as a positive recommendation or negative, you can send it to the city council. They can send it back. So there is a process there. And I want y'all to know those things just to take advantage of that if ever needed. The part of that, the reasoning is the zonings that we have in the city can be fairly complicated occasionally. You may have a big commercial rezoning. You may have a small residential rezoning. Y'all have had both in the past year of those type of items. Having said that, when you're going through the reports, when you're going through the criteria, just keep in mind that you want to give it the best and the most fair shake that you can give the process in general. For tonight, I want to give you a little overview on some planning and zoning things, and I want to come back to what I feel are some of the details of a zoning case. And also, there'll be other training sessions. I'll have our city attorney come to a future meeting to talk to y'all when we have a light agenda. Tonight, I wanted to be light. I wanted to stay within an hour. And if y'all want to ask any questions of me or the staff, I'm glad to do that. We don't need to be here, all night for the meeting. I know y'all have to do that on occasion. But some of the planning and zoning overview that we have, and some of this stuff is somewhat basic, but I wanted you to understand that if you have any questions, please let me know. If it is too basic, let me know that as well. So on developing a vision for the community, that's part of what we have to do as planners, is there's a 10-year, every 10 years, we have to continue our qualified local government status. So you have to have a comprehensive plan. You have to show that everything's in good standing with the city, not just the planning department, but also every other aspect of how the city operates. You have to have a short-term work program, and that's a 5-year schedule on looking at that as well. Let's say we also have our comprehensive plan, which even though it has to be updated more frequently, it is a 20-year vision into the future. And I've done several of these over the years, and it's always fun to look back and see what are the changes in a community, what are the current events, when you have something like COVID or you have the 2008 recession, things like that, that almost puts a comprehensive plan on hold. So things that you thought might happen probably did not happen. If you're in a robust economy, things, additional, growth may occur in a little bit different area. So you have to be prepared for that and modify the plan accordingly. Our next plan is to be updated in a couple of years in 2025. I think last time, Richard, we did it in-house. Didn't we do the update with the ARC? Yeah. And the city it's fairly built out. We'll have a lot of redevelopment, more redevelopments. That's very important for you as a planning commission member, is to look at what kind of redevelopment you would want to occur in different areas. A lot of the redevelopment in our city, comes from the private sector in terms of what's occurring, especially around this area where we are, the mall area. It's seen quite a resurgence in restaurants and reuses and more office developments. And so each case is somewhat different. The village has been a major portion of what we've done lately, and our master plan and code updates that go along with the Dunwoody Village. Also the new sign ordinance, our trail master plan, and our local road safety plan. All these are initiatives that are part of what we do and need to know about as planners. So planning and zoning, here again, you're talking about your comprehensive plan, your future land use map, and what the current zoning is, or what the current zoning request may be for that new facility, or for that new concept that's coming into the city. Some of these things y'all have to focus on when it comes to a zoning issue are the land development codes, zoning, platting, subdivision standards, lot size, buffers, conditional uses. Each one of these things is spelled out in the code. And I would always encourage you, if there's ever a spot that you feel that you want more information, please call the staff in advance. You can call me. I'm glad to talk to any of y'all about any upcoming zoning case or any specific issues. I don't want any of y'all, and I'm not saying you do, but I don't want you to feel like you don't have enough information. If you ever don't feel that way, please just press that button, so to speak, and reach out to staff, and we're glad to help guide you through the process. And you can also ask the questions, of course, once the public hearing comes out. And that's one thing I want you to know is once the public hearing starts, there's always new information. It's new information that comes to the staff at that point, because the staff doesn't have the benefit when they make their recommendation of the public comment. Y'all are the first line that gets that information. So what I want to be sure of is that everything you have gets relayed appropriately to the city council. And I don't mean that against the staff at all. What I mean is there's anything else that you would like to send forward to the city council, please, there are channels you can do that. You're not trying to influence a decision. You're a recommending body. There's a report that could be generated separate from the staff report to say, hey, this is what came out of the planning commission. Sure, that's in the report and it's in the minutes. But if the chairman would prefer to have something more robust to the city council, we can certainly do that as well. Because sometimes there's a different flavor to their between the city council meeting and the planning commission meeting. And one thing I always want to be sure of is that the applicants that are coming before y'all respect the planning commission. And there's different ways for that. One is, do they respect what the staff did, how the staff met with them? Do they respect, y'all up here and how you conduct yourselves? Because what I don't want it to be is like, hey, it's a stepping stone. Oh, we have to go through the planning commission just to get to the city council. And sometimes there's always been, over the years, there's been some developers don't want to bring their best to y'all. They want to bring it to the best to the city council. So they'll bring maybe a sloppier development to y'all and then want to refine it more. In other words, that way they can give up more stuff later. Say, well, we did more stuff based on, we just felt the need to do that. It was kind of years ago when I was at Douglas County, we had our planning commission and the county commission met at the same time. So I had 5 planning commission members, actually 7 planning commission members and 5 county commissioners all at the dais at the same time. One public hearing. It was unique in a way because the developers sometimes would ask, okay, Eric, how much time is there between the meetings? Because they would want to know whether there's a month or so in most communities between the meetings. I said, you got about 5 seconds, between the meetings, because you better bring your best game forward. Now, each community works a little different. I don't think that model would work in our community, having everybody at the same place. I did not like it at first, but they've been doing it that way for years. And it continues to go like that today. It worked in that community. But here, we have a three meeting system, basically. You have your first public hearing, which is y'all have. And frankly, under the state rules, there's only one public hearing that's required, but we have two. We have the second one at the city council meeting, and then we have our second read at the council meeting. Part of the training too is I want to work with the city council. The second meeting is not a time for the city council, that is not a time to rehash the entire zoning case. That's just confirming what was said at the first one. In a lot of ways, I wish there was just one meeting for them because it puts a lot of pressure on the city council between the two. So that kind of comes back to y'all. The more definition and work that can be done at the planning commission level, the better. And that's why I kind of like the idea if y'all want to work in the report and one of the staff members can be assigned to that to help generate that. Like I said, that's separate from the minutes, separate from the staff report, but kind of it could be just a paragraph or so of what your thoughts were from this meeting and what you learned from the public. Because that's the big difference right there. The the districts that are within the code, I don't expect y'all to know the ins and outs of every district. I do expect the staff to know that. That's their job, is to know the code back and forth. Remember, y'all are taking the case and you can kind of come into it blind a little bit. You're here to listen to the public. You're looking at the staff report. One thing I would encourage you to do, if you're not already doing it, is always go out and visit the site at some point. And we can work, if there's ever if you need directions or assistance finding that, or if one of y'all wants to sit down with one of the staff members and go take a look at the property, and get a feel for it more, please do that. I always learned over the years that there was a lot of advantages just to what I call walking the property. Now, you don't have to get out of the car. You can a lot of times see it from the car. You don't want to go on a property without permission either, but you can see it by riding around, look at the neighborhood, look at the area, and it's always very beneficial because the public expects y'all to be an expert on that piece of property. Like I said, not on the zoning code 100%, but on the property itself. So please always take a look at the property when you go out, whenever before it comes to a hearing. Let's see what else we've got here. So our zoning map, which is an interactive map, you can go on the web and take a look at it. As you can see, most of the city is residential, of course. You do have all the area around the perimeter, and that which is our, our main primary focus for all of the metro area. Frankly, we like to view ourselves as the new downtown from the standpoint of the corporate businesses in the region. And here are some of just the zoning districts. This just talks about the minimum square footage of the lot sizes. Like I said, this is technical stuff. It's just something you want to have. You don't need to memorize it or anything of that nature. Is that the last slide, Paul, or is there, have I gotten off onto I've gotten off onto the other screen there. I see what I did. So the zoning regulations, what you can do on a piece of property, what's allowed, what's permitted in the zone is the main thing that y'all are looking at. And I don't want to talk about any active cases, but when I finish speaking, if there's a past case you want to talk about, we can go through that. But anything that's active or could have a litigation, I don't want to talk about publicly tonight. The Georgia zoning procedures law, if you haven't reviewed this, please review that at your leisure at some point. This is something too, if any of y'all, and when I spoke to Richard a few weeks ago, if there's any training y'all would like to go to, we've identified some different type of training. It's not mandatory, but if there's something you'd like to go to, let us know. Is it on the, do you want to help set it up there? If you, and we can, and there's nothing, in that thing that you can't look at later. I'm just kind of skipping through it. So we'll get you set up. Okay. But the zoning procedures law and training is what I was talking about as well. If there's anything you'd like to go to, if you see a class sometime, we're glad to pay for that class. Some of the things that we found, they're a day long or maybe a couple of days long. I would encourage you to do those There's, the ARC offers some stuff. What was the other one? We had the Carl Vinson Institute. Is the Georgia Planning Academy still around, or is that not really? Okay. Yeah, there used to be a really good one with the Georgia Planning Academy. Was excellent training. Each community is different. Some of the ones are geared for Georgia in general. And, Georgia as a whole is, we're one of the more urban areas in Georgia, and the type of zoning you're going to see is a lot different than small stuff or even huge subdivisions that are being constructed. We're not going to have to deal with that here. Our stuff's very refined. We always follow the law on the advertising. And one of the hurdles we have to deal with is the legal publication, because our newspaper is only, one day a week, and it creates some issues if there's a error in the ad from that standpoint, whether we made the error or if the newspaper, and it can offset the entire zoning case. That's unique to Dunwoody from that standpoint. But print publications are somewhat dying breed throughout, so it's becoming more and more of an issue in all communities at this point. We're hoping that at some point the law will be changed where we can use just online advertising. It'll give a lot more flexibility to what we're allowed to do. Special use permits, y'all had one of those a month or so ago, very similar to how a zoning is treated. The conditions, one thing on the conditions and on a zoning, one thing I want to talk about on conditional zoning, and that's if y'all are placing conditions on a property. Look through that. The applicant has to agree to the conditions, and y'all may ask the applicant, hey, do you agree to these conditions, especially if we make any conditions that during that hearing. But it's always there's nothing wrong with ever adding conditions. There's always some theories in time. If we have to add a bunch of conditions, then your code is deficient. Well, I don't really think our code is okay. Zoning conditions are good, and they're fine to add to any case. And that's part of what I would put in that memo to the council as it goes forward, where these were the conditions that were done that way. One thing staff can do in that memo as well is, and it's something I started doing, is I would put in my staff report, my recommendation, and then I would add what the planning commission said to that same report. I just want to be sure it's something the council sees right up front, because they have many documents they look at on any particular night where they have a city council meeting, and they put a lot of time and effort. And the more clout that's given to y'all in terms of saying, hey, this is what we determined at the public hearing, because you'll have a lot of people could be the same people. Other times there'll be a different crowd. Depends on what's going on in that neighborhood area, if they can all come back out. Some of this other stuff is just for y'all's benefit. It just talks about your rules and procedures and what a quorum and those type of things. But what I really want to empower y'all with tonight is to talk about, what issues do y'all see, or what hurdles do y'all see as a planning commission, and what can we do as staff to improve those items. When you're looking at a zoning case too, and Richard, you put in there in your staff report, the criteria for the rezoning, those are the main things you always have to hang your hat on, which is, is it in the best interest of I'm just really summarizing, but is it in the best interest of the community? Does it follow the comprehensive plan? And there's things of that nature that come along with any zoning request. And that's what you really need to look at. And when you make your decision, you can base it on that. If you're going to deny something, you don't owe the applicant a big explanation. You make your decision and move on to the next item, or you're finished with the meeting. Don't feel obligated to give a ton of explanation. Frankly, sometimes the less said, the better on an application. But you can always point to the comprehensive plan or those different criteria, and somebody can make a motion as, I'm not comfortable with this. It doesn't meet the comprehensive plan, or it doesn't meet, it's not in the best interest of the community for this reason. And then move on from there. Because anything that's said, is subject to any kind of legal litigation of any kind later down the road. Part of what y'all are doing, though, y'all are a recommending body, so you're not making a final decision. So you don't have to worry about that as much as, say, the city council does. But it's still y'all are the first ones looking over an item. So anything we can do to help with that, I want to do. But I'd love to have any questions from y'all or anything else that we can do better on zonings. Who's been on the board the longest at this point? Okay, and how long you've been?
2016.
26, right, okay. And during that time, you've seen quite a few zonings that have come before you. And I think if there's any of them you want to talk about from the past, or if there's anything you want to bring up, and because that's a good time to have been on the planning commission, because you've seen quite a few things, learned a lot, and you probably have some ideas of things you may want to make modifications to.
Well, yeah, I think there are a couple of things I would point out, and one has been kind of an ongoing burr in the saddle, so to speak, that's kind of our own making, and that was the change to the here at once, and then the next time you see it, you're done with it, come hell or high water. And I understand the need for that, but one of the things that I've been saying here over the past couple of years is ideas coming to us in a half-baked state, and I don't think that's the issue of our team here. And maybe this goes to the issue that you described at the outset of your speech, which is, folks not bringing their A game, so to speak. But it's puts us in a frustrating position where you're now relying on us to help you push your jalopy across the finish line when it should be tuned up and ready to go. And it all but guarantees that we're going to call a second meeting based on this, which is, I think, frustrating to a lot of us too, who would rather just deal with an issue and move forward. And so I'm not sure necessarily how to address that, but I would raise it as a concern, and it kind of is amplified somewhat by the idea that we only get 2 bites at the apple, so to speak, the first and the second. So not necessarily sure how to fix it, but I would say that's kind of the biggest concern. As far as specific projects of interest, one of the things that stuck out to me as an interesting item that we considered, and just how comprehensive it was the property over here on the old the old city hall location. And what made it particularly, I don't know, compelling, challenging, I'm not sure how best to put it, probably all the above, was there were so many different uses being packed into this one space, and trying to figure out how those are all going to play together, trying to make recommendations, trying to, as a recommending body, make the most meaningful recommendations to council, but at the same time within the kind of the 4 corners of what they were trying to accomplish. And I find that even issues like, well, one of the things that again sticks out to me is the issue of the parking situation, where parking is significantly kind of divergent from where the living space is. So how are we going to deal with older folks that are living there? How are we going to deal with and I think to a large degree that the plan was silent about that. And so knowing whether we are the ones expected to raise that, or we're entitled to hear a fully baked plan from the folks presenting it, is kind of that middle ground across which we walk. And so I don't know, I think that's a good one to discuss, because there is so much jam packed in there. And
Sure.
We've seen so many different ideas come through there, none of which have, I think, stuck at this point. So
Right.
That's my 2
Okay,
cents.
well, let me address those in for a moment. Okay, on the tabling issue, the 2 bites and somebody bringing their best game forward, I think what we can start with on that is the staff starting with make sure the applicant has everything they need. And staff, in my opinion, y'all can push back on the applicant and say, hey, look, if something's not ready, don't accept the application, or don't assign a date to that application. So I think that's a big part of what we need to do there. So in other words, we need to force them to bring their best game forward. Now, let's say somebody brings it that night, they're bringing it up, you have the public here to speak, let them, you still got to conduct your public hearing. But I think y'all can send a message back to the applicant saying, we're going to vote that we're not here to negotiate tonight. We're going to table this because you haven't brought your best forward. And I think at that point, you got to kind of think we have to think differently on how you can get it back in front of you. So if they don't have them bring their best game forward, now you're getting it down to 1 time before it has to go to the city council. So that's okay, because you sent them a message saying, hey, we're going to hear it. We're going to listen to the public, but we're not going to spend a ton of time because we don't think this is your best application. You can send it forward to the city council at that point the next time with a recommendation that it referred back to the planning commission. Because Tim, frankly, you don't have enough information. You're following the rules that were laid out. The reason that rule was put in It wasn't any one thing. It's a common rule. It's in a lot of jurisdictions. It's because it just some point it needs to move forward. Sometimes the elected body may want it to come forward because they're getting, pressure from the public as well on when is that zoning case coming forward. So they've kind of told them, hey, it's coming forward next month, and then it gets pushed off another 6 months. So that's why that rule is there. It just changes the way. There's still a way to do, I believe, do what you want to do. And there may be times when, you may refer it, say we'd like for it to come back, and it doesn't come back. And that's just, you did your job. You heard the public hearing, but you've turned it over to the elected officials at that point. So you hope that they would maybe send it back if it's an item that's deficient in terms of what it needs to be its best game. The property down the street is, it's a very unique piece of property. It's unique from the standpoint it was developed many years ago, and now it's wanting to be redeveloped or developed even in a bigger, larger fashion. And that's part of what we have to look at on our comprehensive plan too. What's the best piece for that area? It does, even though you can't access neighborhoods from there, across the creek into the Shanley Dunwoody, it's viewed as part of that neighborhood in some regards. If you put a 20-story building, that people don't like that because then they're peering down, they feel like into their area, into their neighborhood. So on that one, we had a residential use that was proposed, which wasn't a bad plan at the end of the day, but it didn't move forward, for different reasons, right? That all got pushed to the side for now, anyway, based on financing and things that are outside of y'all's control, outside of our control, everybody's control. So on that issue, that's a large case. That's a big deal. It's not a slam dunk on what's the best route to take on that type of issue. And there have been many different ideas of what could go there. That's, like I said, that's a very difficult piece of property to determine what's the highest and best use in that area. And I think the owner is even, struggling with that some, what is their highest and best use for that parcel, especially in light of what's going on on the other side of Ashford Dunwoody, towards High Street, Campus 244, all that. And that's part of what we have to look at in that whole perimeter area. I mean, we did the new perimeter zoning code, and that was something that was underway when I got here. It predates this staff. And it predates a lot of the council members, frankly. But I think the idea of that is how is our perimeter area, which is our, we don't have a bunch of vacant land or any vacant land to redo. We have to make the best for the city of Dunwoody out of this area that's kind of south of where we're sitting now. And so that piece over there doesn't have the same accessibility as it does on the other side of Ashford Dunwoody. So I think as time goes on, it will work its way out as far as what's going to be the highest and best use over there. But it doesn't help you, what I'm saying in terms of how do you navigate that case? I think part of it is too, I'm not sure that the best effort was brought forward by the developer because it wasn't quite ready to go from a financing standpoint and from some other things. So I think you can really ask some very hard questions of the developer. Remember, y'all are the first sounding board. Stay within the parameters. That's why we provided some of the zoning information about the law, basically. Stay within those parameters. Listen to the staff for some guidance on that ahead of time. If there's any questions you have with the staff, you can talk to them about it. We don't like for y'all to talk to the public outside of the public hearing because it can, have favoritism, can be viewed as an issue. But on that case, that was something that the council really struggled with, what was the best for that area as well. It's always going to be somewhat of a struggle, and I'm talking more specifics now about that piece just because of the road network. When that area was developed, that was the first thing to be developed in this whole area, was that Perimeter Center East development, and it made Dunwoody part of what it is today. There's no question about that. But times have changed in terms of, and that stuff got old. It's 50 years old. It's time for something different in that area. We spent a lot of time on walkability and how the community can get to the MARTA station or back to the mall, less traffic. Because pre-COVID, if y'all remember, especially when City Hall was over there, and you had State Farm and other offices over there at 5 o'clock, that was gridlocked in that area. We really haven't hit that again, but that's a I won't say it's a planning failure at some point, but at some point, that's not ideal. How about that? You know, you really want to have a better way to the area to commute out of there. So as the office developments have moved more towards the Hammond Road and that side of things, you know, it's probably a highest and best use over there is probably gonna be something with a little bit less traffic. I don't know what that could be exactly. One of the things that pops up a lot in our community, and y'all have seen a couple of them, is senior living. You know, we've looked at those type of land uses for our community, and aging in place. That's a big deal for a lot of citizens of Dunwoody. We hear that from different people, which is a great thing to hear because it tells me that people want to stay in Dunwoody. They've been here for 30, 40 years, maybe. They don't want to leave the community. They have deep roots here in the community. And so those are good challenges to have. And I think at any point in time, especially if there's a time where you don't have an item on the planning commission, you know, you can always talk about those. Hey, we want to focus, just let Richard give him and his staff a heads up. Hey, we'd like to focus or know more about an area of the city. And that's an excellent area to always have this discussion on. What do we want to see over there? Y'all have that ability as a planning commission member to kind of look at some things, make recommendations to the city council, because they really count on y'all to make some solid recommendations to them for future land use, because that area is one of the, I mean, it's a golden area of the city. What are we going to do? What's going to happen over there ultimately? Where are we, Richard, with the stuff at the Ravinia, that development that was going to go in there?
They've got some sign issues.
Okay, but it's going to happen. We don't know. Okay, so here again, another opportunity, you know, for that whole area. Right. Right. So that's, to me, that's a really neat spot to think about. I know a lot of focus that the council spends time on is the village, because that's something they are very focused on. But I think for y'all, you can always, that's already a topic that's being discussed. I'd prefer for y'all to kind of come up with other ideas in areas that are not being discussed as much. And so that way, when a zoning comes up, we can say, hey, the planning commission took a look at this and they came up with some various scenarios. Richard's staff is very dynamic. They can really, they love to dig into different aspects. I do want to be sure everybody's aligned with the city council and their policies of where they're going, because nobody wants to make a recommendation and have the council go a different direction. So we want to be sure. I say that closely because y'all do have the ability to take whatever direction you want. But at the same rate, if you want to be effective, we want to understand what's the city council, what are they, the policymakers, what do they want to see out of the city? Because they're the ones that run for election, and the people have voted them in for certain purposes and certain reasons. So we want to be sure we have a lot of alignment there. And that starts at the staff level, planning commission, city council. I mean, if they've made it clear we don't want a 50-story building over there, then we probably don't need to entertain that. And that's come from the citizens, ultimately. So from the standpoint of opportunities in the city and your zoning actions, they're unlimited really, in terms of the sky's the limit on how you might want to pick an area to focus in on. It's kind of a roundabout way of getting back to your main piece, but that, like I said, that piece is an open slate, in my opinion, of what's the best purpose on that particular zoning case. On a typical case, just, you know, the way y'all handle it has been, the public comes out, you know, the pros and cons, you make your recommendation, look at everything, and it moves on. That's your standard easy case. You don't want to have many of those. I came from an environment where we did about 30 zoning cases a month. And some of them would be very complicated. It could be buildings. Some of them may be could be a used car lot. It could be anything from a church. It could be a new 1 million square foot warehouse, all kinds of different zoning cases. And so you have to, at that time, we had to move through them fairly quickly, because at 15 cases we cut, that's it for the night. 15, then we have 2 meetings a month to try to get through the 30. But as times change, as the economy changes, you've had some times where there weren't any zoning cases for quite a while. Remember during COVID and stuff, we didn't have any cases. But for you, the cases that we're going to have are going to be very detailed cases for mainly this area, like I was saying down here. But I entertain any other questions. Hopefully that gives you some insight for what for what some goals are.
Well, I think so. And I think I would contrast that with one other case that we entertained a couple of years ago. And this was, I believe, the storage facility on Shallowford.
Yes.
And one of the things, and I'll own this, and I'm not sure where the breakdown was, so I'll own that I was where the breakdown was. When that was presented to us, it did not feel like a foregone conclusion that a storage unit was going to be put there. But in actuality, they had a clear entitlement to do so. But instead, we're coming to us hat in hand saying, we want to make it look a little bit better. We want to refine it in some ways. And the way that I viewed my participation in that was, let's try and get as much as we can from these folks to minimize what this looks like. It felt like we had a little bit more latitude than we did. And that's kind of an example of one of these almost done deal sorts of things. And I guess what I would encourage is communicating with those kind of done deal situations, make sure that we know what we can ask for, or help us understand what we can ask for in that case. That one in particular, it felt like there might be some say whether there could be a storage spot or not. But as we found out the night of, no, it's an entitlement. It's perfectly kosher within there. They're just trying to make it a little bit better. So I found that interesting. One of the other things that I think it would be worth having you comment on to the group as well is, well, two things. There are two factors that we hear over and over and over again, and they relate to planning, but they're tangential, or they may not even be allowed to be considered. And I want to get your kind of take on that. And that's the issue of traffic burden and the issue of school burden. We see those issues with all, especially the larger projects that are being proposed. We often find ourselves talking about those, and what we hear from the public is concerns about those factors. Those are kind of the two heavyweights. I'm interested to hear what you think about those issues in context of what our role is in reviewing and providing opinions and recommendations.
I have a clarifying question for that.
Yes.
Could you explain when a traffic impact study or any of that would be triggered?
Sure. Okay, so on the I'm gonna start with the school part first, just because it has a short answer, which schools is something you really can't look at as part of zoning. It's something that everybody wants to look at, and it's a reality, because if a development's going to put a lot of pressure on an overcrowded school already, it's something that we can't focus on completely. So you can't, that's not one of your criteria. Traffic, on the other hand, you can focus on that. If there's a traffic, what I'm going to challenge Richard and his staff with is, if there's a traffic issue, we can always hold the report up. I don't know what our rules are, but we can put rules in place as a staff to require a traffic study if certain thresholds are being met, because you shouldn't have to burn one of your 2 times to ask for a traffic study, because it takes a lot of time to get the study back if they haven't started anywhere. So that is something you can certainly look at. You can't always, sometimes we can have them do traffic improvements. The biggest thing we can focus on, like State Farm was a great example when that one came forward. One thing that staff looked at there were some of the ways the entrances were to the parking lot. The road was put in, the road was modified as well to accommodate that type of development. The other times there's less road frontage, there's more limited options, but it could be something as simple as, hey, it's gonna be a right in, right out entrance, because it needs to have less impact in that area. But yes, absolutely. Traffic is something you can look at. If there's a study that's required, one thing we can look at as staff too is having, and I'm sure, I don't know if y'all were doing it now, meeting with Michael Smith and his team on an item when they first come in, before the application is actually accepted fully. I'd like for the staff to go through the application and sit down with other key staff members, Public Works, Economic Development, and go through the report before we accept it, to say, hey, here's your date. Yes, you filed an application, but the staff reserves the right not to assign it a date until the application is deemed complete. And if a traffic study is part of what needs to be done, then they need to do that in advance, because you need that tool to make your decision. Otherwise, you can't make it. You've got a room full of audience here that's taking their time to come up here, and all you're going to say is, hey, we don't have a traffic study. We can't make a decision tonight or at all until we get that. So I think that's a tool we can use on the staff end to help with that. Because y'all shouldn't have to make that, you shouldn't have to worry, hey, I've got to make a decision whether a traffic study is required. And at any point in time, if you want somebody from another department, let Richard know, hey, I'd like to have Michael Smith or somebody from his team come down here and talk about the traffic a little bit.
I guess like an easy way to help with that, I know a lot of developments won't trigger a traffic impact study at all, just they're not big enough.
Right.
But like the applicant could include like the IT trip generation or something to say like, oh, it's only going to generate 5 extra trips. That
right.
won't be a burden on the
That's
infrastructure.
Right. That's right. That can be done because there's pretty standard numbers in a lot of what we'll see. You know, I mean, you can figure whether it's a residential unit of a certain size, that will generate X number of trips, a commercial, a restaurant, a fast food restaurant versus a sit-down restaurant. All those numbers are readily available. So we can certainly look at those. We're fortunate in this area that a lot of the stuff for traffic. Now State Farm, I'm a huge employer. That's a big number of people coming in and out a day if it was fully employed right now. But you know, some of the other stuff, to your point, it's not going to be as big an impact, but it's a fair question. It's something fair to look at. There's no doubt. So
I just wanted to add on to that because I think too, Commissioner O'Brien's original point was the consistency in the packets that we receive. So, you know, and I know I've asked this before, and so I don't know. And I think what I understood before is there's not a requirement of what they have to provide to staff. For example, a level of detail for landscape plan or a level of detail for, I think in one of the more recent cases, even like the apartments, you know, what would the landscape plan be around that? You know, some of the renderings were very, very light so that we could not really vision what this was going to look like. So correct me if I'm wrong, but part of that is difficult, I think, in managing because sometimes we get these beautiful packages and we can really begin to visualize what that's going to look like. And then sometimes we're not getting it. So is there a way to create an expectation in terms of level of detail with landscape, fencing, so that they're coming, or is that something we cannot have almost a cheat sheet that we're providing the applicants to say, here's an example of the level of detail of what we're expecting for you to come to Planning Commission, because I know you said that we can turn it over and whatnot, but and ask that it come back to us. But ultimately, one of the concerns I've had is that it's almost the inequity of how we consider applicants sometimes. And so this one, we're asking all sorts of landscape questions about, but this one we're not. And I worry that sometimes that could bite us in the tail, that we're not treating them equitably, but we're also not always receiving equitable packages.
That's a fair statement, 100%. I've seen over the years a lot of different kinds of applications. You know, a lot of zoning in Georgia years ago was kind of set up where somebody could just come in and ask for a rezoning. They may have something handwritten even way back. You know, not in Dunwoody, not since Dunwoody's been a city, but years ago, somebody may put something together very basic. And then they would ask for they may ask for like a high commercial zoning category. And it would be granted, but a lot of times, to your point about, the city or the county might have gotten bitten on it because they'll come in and want to rezone it. But meanwhile, they've got someone else that's going to sell it and put kind of an obnoxious use on the property that was allowed. But because it was sold to the Planning Commission and the city council in a certain way, it wasn't, that use wasn't really looked at. But part of what we can do on what you're asking about is, I like for the staff, we can set additional conditions out for our, when I say conditions, requirements is what I should say, requirements for a zoning. And whether we can do that internally or whether we need to get it codified by the city council, I'll have to get our city attorney to look at that. But we can say, hey, here are certain standards. Now, there are always some exceptions because anybody in the city has the right to rezone their property. So what you don't want to have an undue burden on the person. So if it's somebody who owns an acre parcel over here and they've owned it forever, and they want to try to zone it themselves, maybe as long as they meet the standards, you can still meet the standards and have it hand drawn, say. But when you have a major development, where they're putting, I mean, they've spent a ton of money on due diligence and everything. They do need to spend a little bit more money and have the appropriate plan. The question is this too, are they not just not giving y'all the plan? Are they going to do the plan after it passes y'all? Oh, now we've kind of gotten our first filter. That's where I want y'all to use the tool. Hey, look, y'all didn't, you didn't come to us with your best package. And I don't mind, it's fine, that's a fair statement. You don't want to be discriminatory in any language or anything else you use towards the applicant there, but you do want to tell them, hey, this is not what we expect as far as standards in Dunwoody. And our challenge with the staff, you can do that as well, is make sure it's 100% before we see it.
And can I just have you maybe because we do have a new, a very new board in terms of like a lot of turnover. Could you share with some things that we can ask about? What are those details? What are those from a major development to even something smaller, like we were just considering last month? What are the things we can look at and ask as a board?
Okay. Well, I think, and that's part of your, any kind of conditions you wanted to do two things. One is it the best application that's come forward? And what's the basic information that should already be in there? And number two, what other conditions or things can y'all ask for outside of that, especially once you get the public hearing? You can look at different design aspects of it. How's it going to look? How's it situated on the lot? The number of stories, things of that nature. What you don't want to get involved in are the color of the front doors, things of that nature. And that happens in some jurisdictions. Now, some places that, like Peachtree City, different areas, they may have certain zoning codes that do address that. We don't. So you don't want to focus too much off on a tangent in terms of the type of trim or the type of doorway or anything of that nature. But the rest of the stuff, the density, you can look at the density, the lot coverage, when it comes to any kind of zoning issue, the uses, look at your uses within the code book. You can eliminate certain uses if the applicant agrees. In Georgia, the applicant has to agree to the conditions. And that's something you always want to ask. Do you agree to those conditions? Especially if they have an attorney. The attorney knows what you're asking him. They'll say, yes, we agree, or no, we don't. And they may be thinking, hey, it's going to go up to the city council, and then that's where the real decision's made. They may be thinking, what I want to instill in them is, no, the planning commission is the first run at it, and you really need to bring your best piece forward. And so each case can be somewhat, each case in zoning, of course, is unique. But also, like on a large development like State Farm, if they come before you, it's a huge development. They've got all their top people. They're putting in millions and millions of dollars into that project. They are going to bring their best game forward. You have a developer, somebody's developing the site for them. And then they're going to lease it back. So it's a big, big business. They're going to want to bring their best piece. Somebody who's kind of fishing, so to speak, on a rezoning, they don't really know, they don't have an end user 100%. You can kind of filter those out, and you can ask a lot of hard questions. What's it going to look like? For example, the zoning a couple of doors down here, we put a lot of time and effort into that. We wanted it when you're driving down Ashford Dunwoody, to look like it's the front of the store. And there should be some doors, and there are along there. A couple of them didn't turn out exactly like we wanted. It's a nice development overall. It's an internal development, but we don't want the back of the store on the street. Part of what we changed to a few years ago, and the staff really likes this, which is where we're shoving all the buildings towards the street. You're bringing everything forward, make it more walkable and things of that nature. Those are things you can really focus on as well. I think like where the QT is now, just opened the other day, but the pumps are in the back. That's a big deal. We didn't want it to look like a gas station. Now, that's no offense to QT. They're a great operation. That's their business. But they agreed to it. Years ago, there was a zoning that I did with Dollar General, and they're building, they're Dollar. They want to be cheap. They want the building to look cheap. They don't want an expensive, look, because they want people to come and say, hey, look, this is it. So they were mainly building metal buildings, may have a brick facade, may not. So they were building one in what we called our corridor area, and the corridor area had to have a pitch roof. And so we're like, and I said, no, you can't build this flat roof. They're like, oh no, it's pitched. It slopes like this. Said it slopes 1 foot for 20 feet or something. That's not a pitch roof. So finally, they agreed and they did it, and they were so happy with that development. They said, this is our corporate, it's not their model necessarily, but they wanted to show it to their other corporate people and say, look, we put a Dollar General in this area, met their requirements and their standards. So I think that's something you can have fun with to a degree, similar to the Quick Trip. That may be a model they'll want to show to their people back at the headquarters. Hey, look, we put this in here. It fit into an upscale area. There's only one other gas station on this whole corridor. And we, put this great development in. It has our new storefront. It looks like it's fronts from the street, pumps are in the back. Those are very unique. That whole center is pretty cool the way it's zoned and the way it has the feel about it. But does that fit everywhere? Would that fit in the village? Probably not. It's not quite the same type of development, but other aspects of it would. The walkability of internal, that will. So those are things you have to really look at. Like I said, each case is unique, but I like the way you're thinking in terms of what needs to be asked, and never feel pressured to make a decision. If you get your packet, I would encourage you to look at your stuff if you have time. I know everybody's busy and it's hard to do things, but look at the sites, look at the report, and ask questions. These folks are always available to ask any questions. And if you want them to even meet you on site, walk it through, please take advantage of that. When I was a planner, I loved going out and meeting with the chairman of the planning commission, meeting with different ones, and be sure we're in lockstep. And as the chairman, you have the ability, you want to talk to your folks and say, hey, do y'all have anything you want to talk about? If you meet, of course, you have to follow open meeting laws. You can't, if you want to meet and talk about stuff, you have to do it in an open forum. So just be mindful of that. But at the same rate, those ideas could be brought up at the end of a meeting one day or in a setting like tonight. So.
A question about, I guess one area that I'm far from an expert in is stormwater management. I guess I want to get a better feel for how much we ought to be digging into something like civil engineering and stormwater management. My assumption is that most of that falls to the land development process after the rezoning is approved, but what should we be looking for or asking for in terms of stormwater?
Right.
And then I guess, just in case it doesn't come back around to me, one other question is, you've encouraged site visits. We get the package a week ahead of time. We do a real good session with staff now, but a week isn't a lot of time to necessarily get a site visit in. I'm just wondering if there's any way for us to kind of have further heads up on the cases that are coming down the line, even if we don't have a full information package.
There is, and what I can like for staff to do is to, once the application is hot, in other words, it's going to move forward, go ahead and send the planning commission a list of the upcoming cases. That way you can go look at it ahead of time and see the case, see it. Because then once you get the report, then at least you've already visited the site. You have that part done. On stormwater, no, that's a tough one. Here's why. The answer is not a tough answer. It's a tough issue when it comes to for y'all, because you got a room full of people out here. They're worried about their property being flooded. They're worried about, is there going to be erosion? What else is going to happen? Where's that water going? They may be somebody not even in that micro community. They may be more in the macro community, and they're worried about the water quality. From a standpoint of where you sit, you don't have to worry about that. It is taken care of in the development process, but you still got to navigate it. You got to navigate it from the standpoint, you got people here. That's their number one concern. So you want them to make sure they understand this will be addressed. And if we know it's an issue with stormwater, which I know just about all of our cases are, for two reasons. One is we have everything's being redeveloped here. When it was developed the first time, there was no stormwater detention or rules or regulations that were put in. Several of the properties, the townhomes in Dunwoody Village, right on the little creek, that had some stormwater concerns with the neighbors over there. We had the development on Roberts Drive had concerns with the stormwater over in that area. It will be addressed, later, but we want people to understand you have to relay to them that we hear their concerns from the public and that we want them to have confidence that staff will address it. One thing, if we know that's going to be an issue, we ought to have somebody from stormwater here that can address that early on. Because sometimes the city council, they'll get challenged with the same issue when it comes up. So
does the city of Dunwoody have a stormwater ordinance in if a site meets a certain threshold of added impervious, that then they'd be required to do water quality treatment as it follows the blue book and all of that. And green infrastructure, is that considered at all? I know that then not like you follow the flow chart as far as like detention and
Mhm.
treatment and all of that, but
Right. No, and it can be, I don't know, we don't require, do we require any green stuff, any bioswales or anything like that? That's something you could talk to the developer about. If they come in with something, you can certainly ask them, hey, are y'all willing to put in as part of your stormwater management, a bioswale or something else? It needs to be sure it's gonna work. Some of that stuff looks good on paper and it works great in Florida. It does. Different types of soil types. Our stuff here, we have a lot more topography. We have more clay soils. You know, in Florida, for example, you see retention ponds, you know, detention ponds have fountains in them. You don't see that much here. You know, Concourse has something over there, you know, they put in that huge lake they have around their property. But here it's really hard to do. And so, but it's a fair question to ask. They will have to meet the minimum requirements, which does include a detention, water quality less so, you know, but it has to do more with the flow coming off the site. Even on the, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's, I just want to piggyback on these because I think these are some really good points and some good questions. And so it's a bit of a comparison to, I think, understand when we could expect just it even being part of the presentation. For example, I remember on the Roberts Drive, with the new development of those homes, with the roads, that they were, that was a large discussion point of that property.
Absolutely.
And as part of our packet was a plan, they provided like how that was going to be managed, including conversations with adjoining neighbors and complexes to update and prevent the flooding and whatnot. As a juxtaposition, when we talk about the property just from last month, and you know, we went from what would have been a 35% impervious, you know, you're in a traditional neighborhood, to what was it, 60% impervious. That is in terms of impervious coverage, that is out of character, a significant difference. And so, but we weren't seeing, well, are there going to be flow wells? Where will those flow wells be? You know, if the topography of the lot's being changed at all, you know, here's our plans. And so I wonder, that's part of my question. And that goes back to equity in consideration of how are we expected to, so I know we should think about stormwater. I know that our staff is definitely thinking about stormwater, but in terms of our approval of a project, if I'm being asked to green light something that's significant change, then I want to make sure that I'm considering all of those things. But if there's not that equity in that package presentation, then I can't necessarily do that. So how do we rectify that?
Yeah, and here again, it has to be on a case by case basis, but you know, nobody expects y'all to be a stormwater engineer or a civil engineer on each one to have to design to that level. It's still a realistic concern though. You want to be sure that you're not creating a problem. And when it becomes to impervious area, that if you're approving beyond the scope of it, and that's a valid point where you want to be convinced that it's going to meet, you know, stormwater criteria. And that's where you'd want an expert from the staff to come in and talk about that aspect of it. You know, most other developments, you know, there is, like I said, the stormwater aspect will be taken care of. Like, I don't worry as much in the commercial zones because there's underground detention they can put in. They're going to spend more money on it necessarily. But if it's in an area, if it's residential, you're probably not going to have it underground because there's not a parking lot to put it under. So on the case on Roberts, for example, the neighbors were very worried about it. And there was an old storm pipe, if you remember, on that property as well. And that's something, and it becomes a issue y'all have to work out, or not y'all, but you have to hear about it, I should say, from the neighbors, because they're trying to get an agreement to replace an old pipe that they own. It helps them. The developer, you know, wants to do something, you know, hopefully will have a good marriage between the two, the existing homeowners and then the developer. But that becomes a very, you at one point, I believe that became the number one issue on that development, was how stormwater was going to be handled. And it creates a real challenge for y'all, because because y'all are here to talk about land use. And now we're focused on having to talk about issues that we're worried that are going to impact, surrounding neighbors. But it does go back to, you have to keep your land use hat on. The land use hat is, well, I'm gonna wear the land use hat and still talk about stormwater, because it is part of it. If you weren't changing the land use, what's going to go here, then stormwater would not be an issue. If it was, when it was a farm, it wasn't an issue, but now it is. So it's a real challenge, and it's hard to navigate. But what I'm going to point back to is ahead of time, like, if that's going to come up on an upcoming zoning, hey, Richard, we'd like for you to have Carl Thomas or Michael Smith come up here and help explain, what the standards are and what some of our procedures are for stormwater, and to give us a sense that this will be addressed at a level following the state guidelines and city guidelines for stormwater retention. Because it doesn't feel good to approve something from where you sit if it's going to create another problem. So it's better to have, more information from staff. But like I said, each case, every time, it will be different.
Well, and that one in particular is kind of vexing, because if we don't provide solutions, the land use as it would have been approved would necessarily have, I believe, jumped up to 60%. So what we're hearing is folks say at the 35% limit, we already have problems. We approve this project without a consideration of stormwater. There's
Right.
a strong likelihood that those problems will get worse just by virtue of a reasonable use that they would be otherwise entitled to by virtue of our approval.
Right.
I think at the very least that, like, if they have a survey of the site, that they would be able to do the baseline drainage calculations to show the existing flow and then the post-construction flow. And if we at least had that number, obviously they still should be working on their stormwater solutions and everything like that. But showing that added impervious is going to cause this,
Right.
and that they can address it,
Yeah.
would
And
be
that's a fair
helpful.
ask. That's a fair, do we require stormwater calculations? Okay. And it may be, because it's one of those things that there's a initial stage they'll do, and then they'll do the fine, if it gets approved, because the drawings you see are usually renderings of what it's going to look like. They haven't done the fine engineering work. It's still a fair question to ask. And I think, Richard, we want to look at what's the maximum we can ask for without a full engineering study, but a preliminary engineering study of how it's going to turn out. Because I think stormwater in our community, there's a lot of people who have, different kind of flooding issues that was inherited back, years ago when the developments were put in the 70s in Dunwoody. And what's happened over time, and it's not unique to Dunwoody, is, the urban streams, they silt up, they move a little bit over time, and it becomes more and more where the volume of water that's being handled has changed. The depth of the stream has changed. It's probably gotten wider, maybe shallower. So those things that's a valid issue. And we'll let us work on that some, because that's a good point.
Yeah, as long as they have survey or even using the GIS layers, they should at least be able to delineate like where the water's going to go.
Right. And just so y'all know, one thing, there was a few years ago, FEMA came in and updated our maps with flood water, flood areas. And so those are all good things. And of course, the area it's gotten larger, but there's also more information. There's more data points too, where sometimes FEMA might say, hey, this whole pasture is a floodplain because there wasn't any data on it. And now that there's data on it, it's only one little piece of it. So the blue part may have gotten reduced. Most of the time it's gotten larger though. So there are things that can be done in different floodplains and areas for stormwater. But the last thing we want to do is create an issue for an existing property owner, whether it's residential or commercial. You don't want to put more water on them. But I think part of what y'all's due diligence is to ask for some of that up front. Like I said, you're not expected to have to understand it to the nth degree, but understand just the basics. Hey, there's more water coming. We don't want it to be a problem. How are you going to handle that? Especially in the case where you're going from 35 to 60%. There's no doubt there's going to be more water. They have to retain it on property, detain the water, slow it down, and have to capture that somehow, or have easements of how that water is going to be taken off the property. And that's a real challenge for a lot of things. And when we build a park, we have to do all that. we have to hold those high standards of where the water is going to go. Because we certainly don't want to flood anybody's property for numerous reasons. So that's something that is always looked at as well. But we can work on that. I'm glad to have, that's what I wanted to gather tonight too, were some points of what y'all see as pinch points for any rezoning.
I do have, oh, I'm so sorry. I just,
I guess, since I asked a question about stormwater, I guess my takeaway from it is maybe we're not necessarily wanting to dig into numbers, but we maybe ought to be probing a little more, especially when it comes to light as a significant issue for the particular case, and people are speaking out against it,
Right.
whatever, to ask staff, are they meeting minimums, or are they going above and beyond what they would do, or ask the applicant, have they considered
Right.
stormwater impacts and what kind of solutions
That's fair.
they may have.
That's fair. And if they're and also if they want to are they going to do any kind of, anything over and beyond, in terms of, bioswales
Right.
or filtration, like on our parks, we put an extra filtration in the catch basins. And it's a maintenance item. We have to go maintain it. So it would need to be part of the HOA. And here again, that gets into a whole other, points of discussion, but somebody needs to maintain those structures. So they're great to have those, but sometimes if they're not going to be maintained, then they won't function properly, of course. But that's a fair question to ask, especially when the public has come out.
something that I hope maybe in future, what I'd like to learn more about is, and I'm using it as as last month's example, because it provided a unique challenge. So when we're considering PCID developments, we're really considering developments that already exist. So we're putting apartments where apartments are, we're putting commercial where commercial is, and retail, and it's a different consideration than, for example, when we're talking about residential and changing residential use within residential. And what I mean by that is that we have, in our comprehensive use plan, we have code and regulation that allows us to put in, for example, group homes, or the group living situations. And then we have other language, and I don't have it in front of me, so I don't want to misspeak, but things, words like character, inside, so that as we're making some of these changes inside residential to allow these opportunities, that we're also recognizing the importance of the character of the community. And how do we marry those two? Because one of the things that struck me, just as an example, that I was having a hard time wrapping my head around with this last case, was the idea that we have something that could be a benefit, but also at the same time, we were making a decision that was impacting the character of residential by virtue of either the size of the building or lack of garage or a parking lot in a residential, on a residential lot. So moving forward, I think I'd like to understand more about how to marry character and use, and how we can consider that and how we should consider that.
Okay. And there are some things you can do, and there's some things that are very difficult to manage, because, a lot of the houses, I mean, it's the same problem from anywhere from Tucker to Brookhaven to Sandy Springs to us. A lot of the older homes are being torn down, and a new home goes in, and it's 3 stories compared to what was a 1 story. So some people may say, hey, that's incompatible. Other people say, well, that's great, because the whole area it's going to happen to everybody's lot eventually. So that's a difficult piece right there to manage. And based on, property rights and different things, that's a hard one to manage. What you can manage, though, easier is, I don't think we have requirements for garages and stuff in our code. That's something that can come out of the code. You can say, hey, you have to have a 2-car garage, if that's what you want to do. If it's a single family home, you can have those type of standards can be put into the code if that's something you want to do. If you don't want outside parking because of the way it looks, it's hard to regulate necessarily saying everybody on the street has a garage. A lot of the older homes, they may have closed the garage in and said somebody's den now.
Yeah. Oh, I don't. Yeah. No, I don't mean so much to hang on the garage.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
for me, it was more of a parking lot. For
Sure.
example, if we were to move this into a neighborhood And then all of a sudden a neighborhood had a parking lot. And that's where I have a hard time with that marriage of character and right of use. And so I'm not quite sure where we are in terms of our ability to say like, well, of course, yeah, this is great, but a parking lot, now we start to walk that character
Right.
line.
Right.
And so I'm not sure how to consider that in my role.
Well, okay, that's one of the major considerations for any rezoning is the character of whatever it is. And because I don't want to talk specifically about the one because it's an active case, but on the character of an area, you can use that as a reason to approve or deny. That's completely within your authority. And it's frankly one of your criteria to look at. On that, in the type of use, I know the comprehensive plan may say, hey, we need more of this, whatever the type of use is in the city. Well, that's fine, but doesn't mean it has to go on that particular location. Doesn't mean that's the best spot for it. And from time to time, y'all can always say, hey, we want to look at the comprehensive plan. We feel this is an area, it's something that's come up. We feel it's something that needs to be addressed in our comprehensive plan. You can take a look at that and say, this is the kind of area where it needs to be, or modified, or at least go back and read the comprehensive plan and say, hey, does this make sense? Does it still make sense? Or we want to make a modification because now we're getting new influences of a type of use that we feel is going to be more common in our community. And so that needs to be addressed. And sometimes the council will address certain things from a zoning standpoint through a moratorium to redo a zoning, area or some zoning conditions. You also have, like I said, the comprehensive plan, which you can always point back to. It was not part of that plan. And usually the plans are pretty generic and designed to be fluid, but just because it's in there, you can make it fit in there. It also means you can probably make it where it doesn't fit in that area. So you have to look at, that's part of your criteria when you look at the character of an area. Yes, it kind of fits, or no, it doesn't. And it's designed to be that way. The comprehensive plan is supposed to be fluid. Remember, it's kind of designed as a 20-year plan. Doesn't mean it's supposed to happen in year 1. It may happen in year 19 where that's the right time for that to occur. It's up to the applicant to kind of defend that or sell that to you of why it's good for today. But they're very, like I said, they're very unique issues in our, not unique, excuse me, very common issues in communities like ours. The cities that are around us, are unique from other locations in Georgia where they're talking have raw land, because zoning sometimes becomes a one size fits all by the state. But for us, it's very narrow. I know it's kind of a long answer and I wish there was yes, this is the one way to do it. I know there isn't, but it's very fluid.
No, that's actually really helpful
Okay.
to know that it can go in both directions. And so what I would follow up, and maybe this is future for me, because is the idea of, again, when we make decisions, approval of things, and I guess it's not really us because we're not making decisions, but city council, for example, when they approve things, like what's precedent setting, what isn't. Like if we're saying yes to this, are we saying yes to this in all cases, or what is the gravity of some of our decisions that we make?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because whenever a decision is made, there is a precedent of some type being set, but it doesn't mean it doesn't mean it is one size fits all, because it goes back, especially in a city like ours, where there's such dense development in some areas and more, some homes in the city are still on septic tanks, so they're larger lots. So that wouldn't necessarily fit in that area. But I think, one thing I do want you to kind of take away from today, yes, y'all are a recommending body, but take pride in that from the standpoint of your recommending body, and you want to kind of sell your recommendation to the council, so to speak. You want to say, hey, this is why we made the decision to recommend in favor or against, and this is why we put these conditions on there. And the night when we had the public hearing, that was a pretty important deal, is what you kind of want them to know in that report. They need that information when they're making their decisions. I never have wanted any planning commission just to be a pass through. You should feel somewhat empowered to help ask those hard questions, but for the right reasons, because it's a piece of information you need to know, for the right reasons. And like I said, don't get caught on you don't like the fact that the front door is green. Don't worry about that. but do focus on some of these other issues that affect the livability of the community.
I want to circle back to the public works involvement in the process. What review do they do and how do their comments get incorporated as it pertains to like their plans and their future uses possibly of like sidewalks or like the master plan, trail master plan that obviously is going to start to come up now that that is in motion
Right.
with redevelopments, and that sets a precedent that that needs to be incorporated in developments as like a condition, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the way to do that, because you really want that to be a condition of it. I'm gonna ask Richard to come up in a moment and tell him what he currently does. But what I want to do in the future with stuff is have, do we meet with that staff? Normally when a rezoning comes out, is to continue to do that. You know, meet with the staff, go over those conditions, because what they need to do is they need to provide Richard a report, his staff a report of what they want, so that can then be incorporated. And I'm not saying you're not doing that, but that's what ideally you want, is a report from that department. Hey, we have a trail that's coming up, or hey, we need some right of way. Can y'all donate some right of way for this trail segment that's going to come in there? They do a good job with that, but I want to be sure we don't miss anything. Nobody's perfect, so we may miss something from time to time, but we want to really minimize anything that would be missed. Richard, do you want to talk about that as far as what Public Works does?
We have a preliminary meeting before the people even propose zoning, where they meet with my staff, Public Works staff, usually Michael or used to be Ishri before he left. Sometimes the stormwater people, we have our stormwater person as well. Our tree person, sometimes the fire department. So if the situation fits, we will invite anybody and everyone. So, and they all, generally it's Public Works who gets the plans, because when they turn the plans in or ideas in, I'll have them distribute them to Public Works so they can, and we give them ample opportunity to comment, and we capture those comments and some of the conditions that are.
So like at that pre-app meeting, that's when you guys are kind of going through like the expectation that the applicant should expect.
Yes. Yeah, and then once they do it, the staff reviews the list. Do they have everything? And they're get a letter of compliance. Your application is complete, and then it goes on the agenda. So.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, and I think those are really good pieces. And if there's a staff member you want to have here from another department, like I said, if you can get the list ahead of time or what's coming up, let Richard know so we can schedule them to be here and be prepared, because I would encourage that. Because like I said, we don't have that many zoning cases that come before y'all in any 1 year. So let's be sure we get everything y'all need to make the appropriate decisions. And I like I said, I wanted Richard to know tonight from y'all, because it sounds like y'all, he has your support, and I know he has my support as well, to hold these applicants to the highest standards before they come before y'all. Because y'all don't want to, it doesn't do anybody any justice to have an application come in half-baked. So we can certainly do that, you know.
I have a question about public comment. The rule is that there's 10 minutes for, 10 minutes against. How deferential should we be to accepting additional public comment, to extending the time, to making sure everybody gets to be heard? Seems to me, I mean, I'm a lawyer, a rule's a rule, you follow the rules. So should it be more fluid in a hearing?
That's a great question. And it came up last night, as a matter of fact, at the city council meeting. The basic rule is from the state, of course, is 10 minutes per side. Is it 10 or 5? 10. And so but our rule is, and you know, as an attorney, you'll respect this, I believe, which is we have to give equal time. You know, whatever we gave to the one side, we have to give to the other. There have been some communities over the years that set a timer, and they have 10 minutes on there, and they'd wait. If nobody's speaking, they'd still wait the 10 minutes. we don't need to do that. But the applicant, the question becomes this too. When the applicant's standing up here presenting, is that part of their 10 minutes? You know, or then we're calling for in favor. I mean, they are clearly speaking on behalf of their application. The problem is, if there's anybody else that wants to speak in favor of it as well, then there is no more time for that. So the way we've done it at the city council meeting is the applicant makes their presentation. I don't think there's any rule against them having a time limit on their application or try to keep it concise. But there still is the 10 minutes we've reported of a public hearing. Our code is silent on that. Ken Bernard, the city attorney, and I spoke about that again today. He goes, Eric, that's the problem. And even if you enforce the 10 minutes, same when the applicant's presenting, like I said, it just doesn't allow anybody else to speak because they're probably going to use their entire 10 minutes. But I don't think there's anything that prohibits though us from limiting the applicant.
Yeah, Jay found something last night.
Okay. Yeah. Right. We want to get you a better answer because like I said, that came up as last night. Now on the other side, because what's not fair necessarily is if they got to speak for however long presenting, then plus 10 minutes, then the other side, the opposition doesn't have, how many minutes do they get? You know, do they get the entire amount or they just get the 10 minutes plus? You can extend it. And so what we decided to do last night was we had the applicant's presentation, which was extended in length. I mean, extensive, I shouldn't say, don't worry about, I'm mixing two things together. Then they had the 10 minutes to present, which was outside of the applicant presentation. Then the 10 minutes for the other side, for the opposition. So at that point, the opposition, the mayor granted them more time, but they said, now you're also going to get, if we add 5 minutes, the applicant's going to get another 5 minutes as well. So, you know, it kind of, one of the council members said, it depends who gets the last word. You know, if you've got the last word right now as the opposition, if you extend your time, now you're gonna give the applicant the last word because it has to be a fair amount of time. This is a very difficult question for any community to handle. Part of the thing for the planning commission standpoint, though, I would say is, let's say you only have 1 or 2 items on the agenda. It's nice to hear from everybody that's here if they've taken time to come up, but you have to kind of manage it. Maybe you want to say that, hey, we're required to give 10 minutes per side. We don't mind giving longer. If anybody has anything new to say, you know, once that time has come and gone, if there's anything new to say, if you want to come up and we can extend the time and have somebody, the staff, record that time carefully and see if the applicant wants additional time as well. You have the right at that point to cut it off though. You don't have to extend additional time.
Yeah, and I think the way our meeting last month ran was different than the way council did it last night, if I'm not mistaken, because I believe last month, the gentleman speaking as a proponent was timed, spoke in excess of 10 minutes. We as a group granted 10 more minutes, of which he occupied 2 plus whatever additional individuals came up. And then we offered opponents 20 minutes or whatever, I think. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but we took 2 votes, I think, along the way to adjust time so that proponent plus friends had equal time with opponents.
Right. And that's fair.
And that felt pretty reasonable. And I'm pretty sure that's what we were steered through. And
Right.
and I believe Paul was running a clock at the time, and which was speaking while I'm in the chair seat, super helpful
Yes.
when you've got a chime coming from an official in the audience.
You need that. You have to have that.
Yeah, that was awesome. But I think what we did was different than what was done last night. And I would suggest that what happened last week or last month for us worked relatively well for one of our more popular meetings. And then what we then had to deal with at the end of the meeting was folks at public comment wanting to revisit and re-engage with the applicant. We were able to shut that down reasonably well during the public comment session. Anyway, neither here nor there. I'll step back.
Well, no, that's an excellent point. And I do want to get y'all better. The city attorney knows it's an issue now. He's going to get us an answer. So Richard, always make sure Ken gets us that answer, because the way you handle it is perfect. There's nothing and as part of our rules and procedures as planning commission members, that's fine. That's within your discretion. I just want to see what Ken thinks about the law in terms of the applicant's time presenting. You know, because it's always been an issue, not just with Dunwoody, everywhere, because you do want to hear what the applicant has to say, because they're presenting their case, but they're clearly advocating for it under the state law of 10 minutes per side. So,
And that's helpful. I think we had which application was it there? I think it was the apartments. I mean, I feel like the presentation went on for 45 minutes.
right.
So-
And at some point it becomes diminishing returns because y'all have heard enough. You don't want to hear any more information from that standpoint. So that's an interesting point as well. And I've seen it over the years. They just let the applicant go forever and let the other side go forever. They just kind of set the parameters, no time limit. And at that point, it's just freewheeling. You really can't get it back under control. So you do want to have some time piece. And I think the way that I like how you described it, where y'all extended the time, it's official. Hey, look, your time is up. We're going to vote to extend it. We're not obligated to. Or you can simply say, hey, we've heard enough. The advantage y'all have being the recommending body is y'all have a little more luxury in terms of how you can treat the case. I mean, you got to follow the Zoning Procedures Act, but you can treat it from the standpoint, y'all don't have the burden of having made the final decision. You're just recommending, hey, you're trying to do the best job you can do as a volunteer to send something to the council. I know that. The council knows that. The public needs to understand that as well, that y'all are here to really try to vet the issues. So when it does come before the city council, that they have more information. Because this council, the way we do the meetings is it's just an item on the agenda, a regular agenda. It's not just a zoning meeting. Y'all have just a zoning meeting. So use that luxury of that to get the best product you can get. And that's why it goes back to some of my initial statements is you want the applicant to bring their best case forward because you're volunteering. It's your time you're spending up here. And you need the respect from the applicant that they brought their best product to you. So.
Is there anything further? Is there anything further you think we need to know or hear about?
The question I was going to ask is, what would y'all like to hear? Because like I said, the way I kind of saw this when Richard set it up was kind of a 3-part series, so to speak. And the third part's not written. One thing I do want the city attorney to come before y'all at some point. And if there's any questions, and please submit them to Richard if you have anything, or to me, you can always send it to me as well. But Richard can compile them. If there's anything when you go home or before the next meeting that you would like to have more information on. I just want y'all to have everything you need to be successful. And if there's anything else y'all want training, if you see a class you want to take, and I know some of y'all, it doesn't fit your schedule, and that's fine. But anybody who wants to do it, please do so. But Ken is going to put together a presentation for the city council. And after he does a city council training, I want him to use that same one for y'all. When we'll do it in the same format, when it's a meeting like tonight, where there's not something on the agenda. But like I said, use us as a heavy resource for anything you need. Don't be afraid. I mean, I'm not saying anybody's afraid. In Dunwoody, there aren't too many people that are afraid to have public comment. I love that about this community. People are very vocal and want to have their voices heard. So please reach out, have that ahead of time, and let us know if there's anything else we can do.
Yeah, I think it would be worthwhile to, again, not necessarily as a 5-alarm fire type issue, but it would probably be worth hearing from Michael Smith. It would probably be
Fair.
worth hearing from our water folks with regard to what they see as being a reasonable and likely role for us to play in providing feedback that's meaningful and actionable to applicants and ultimately to council. And then of course, everything we've talked about tonight, I heard 4 big issues that kind of come up just about with every project that we hit. And that was the traffic, that was the character, that was the stormwater, and that was schools, which I know we can't talk about necessarily or consider, but I think council would be foolish to ignore it because it's going to be their electorate that's concerned about the quality of the schools. And so navigating those waters in the context of individual projects that come our way, I think is the more we know what sort of moving parts or recommendations that we can make or should abstain from making would be better. So I would encourage the team here to keep this rolling. I think this is exceptionally worthwhile.
Great.
So,
And on the schools, one thing we can do is do we generally get a report from the school system on impacts? Right. So you know, we can ask for more information from the school, the staff can, and that can be part of the report. It's just an FYI. Hey, this development's gonna generate X number of students, we feel, and then it's something we can look at, because you know, typically, you know, over time, you know, what may be the standard number of students for today for a new apartment complex, 10 years from now, it could be double that number of students. There's no way to really know that. But it's still nice to understand, hey, this area is going to go to this school. This school has excess capacity or it doesn't have excess capacity. It's just a fact.
Well, and I think the reason we hear about it so much is, you know, you hear about it in a project like the Swansea Farmhouse.
Right.
Where there was one property becoming multiple.
Yes.
You hear about it in the context of, well, nearly every apartment that's come before us has been age restricted.
Mhm.
I think my theory is as an end around to people's concerns about
True.
transient population hitting the schools hard.
Mhm.
It's an 800-pound gorilla that we have limited tools to
Right.
tackle. And your point's well taken, but at the same time, knowing what we
Mhm.
can and should consider and probably need to best leave alone. I think that it would be helpful for us, but also be helpful for all these folks out here.
It would.
Because I think the quickest ticket to get a crowd full of people here is endanger the schools.
Right.
I mean, honestly, or not endanger them, but
Right.
propose a project
Well,
that burdens them.
overcrowded, right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
so, okay, well, that's my 2 cents. Thank
All
you.
right. No, you're welcome. I'm glad I could be here tonight with y'all, because like I said, my career started out in with, you know, working with planning commissions. So I know how y'all have to deal with stuff very closely. I sat up there many years with the chairman of the planning commission to help advise, and I always use the staff as your resource. And I'm just pointing to Richard because he's the director, but he's your main guy, and then he can distribute it out to his staff. But if you ever have questions, please reach out ahead of time, you know, and ask, hey, I'd like to have some more information. I've saw this zoning case, and he may say, hey, we're already on top of that. We're looking at it. Well, then you have it. All right. And once you get a preliminary piece on a site plan, if Richard, if that's part of the initial package, if they submitted something, forward that on, because there was something on the site plan that you want something more, it'd be nice to have, you can tell the staff, and then the staff needs to really back to the applicant and say, hey, you need to spruce this up some more. It's not detailed enough. It's going to run into a problem at the public hearing. Just better information. We want our community to be the best it can be, and people need to follow that request.
Well, and these pre-meeting meetings that staff has proposed and executed on, speaking strictly for me, have been very valuable. There's a lot of issues coalesced before we ever set foot on the planning commission, and that's absolutely worthwhile. So thank you to the team for that.
Great. Okay, well, good. Well, thank you all for all your time and volunteering. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good.
All right, that does it for our organizational procedural items. Is there any unfinished business? Any new business? Any other business? Any business of any kind? No, I'm kidding. Is there any public comment? Is there any desire for commission comment? All right, well, at that, hearing none, we'll go ahead and stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.